This woman lost everything in 30 seconds. Her relationship, her reputation, her business, and her dignity, all gone in front of 50 witnesses at what was supposed to be the happiest night of her life. Her name is Isabelle, and 3 weeks ago, her boyfriend of 7 years exposed her darkest secret to everyone she loved. But here's what nobody knows. The story behind that devastating moment is far more complicated than anyone realizes. I'm Emma, your storyteller here at Mrs. Emma. And today I'm bringing you a confession that will make you question everything you think you know about loyalty, loneliness, and the breaking point of the human heart. Isabelle was 28 when her entire world came crashing down. For 7 years, she'd been building what everyone around her called the perfect relationship. She worked in event planning, spending her days creating magical moments for other people's love stories. And for the longest time, she believed she was living her own fairy tale with Warren. They'd been together since they were practically kids, 7 full years of memories, laughter, and dreams shared between two people who thought they'd found forever. Isabelle and Warren had this cozy little house they'd been renovating together, turning it into their home piece by piece. She'd post about their relationship constantly on social media because honestly, she was proud. Proud of what they'd built, proud of the love they shared. Warren worked in sales, a high-pressure job filled with endless targets and quotas that kept him stressed. But in the beginning, none of that mattered. He was attentive, spontaneous, romantic. He'd surprise her with random road trips to nowhere special, just to spend time together. He'd listen intently when she talked about her day, genuinely interested in every detail of her life. Those early years felt like magic. Everyone who knew them would say they were relationship goals, the couple that had it all figured out, the pair that would make it through anything. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. Something broke. And Isabelle watched helplessly as the man she loved slowly disappeared, replaced by a stranger who just happened to share his face. The change didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, like watching someone fade away one shade at a time until you barely recognize them anymore. Warren started coming home exhausted, going through the motions of their life together without actually being present. He'd walk through the door, eat whatever dinner Isabelle had prepared, plant himself in front of the television, and zone out completely. When she tried talking to him about it, expressing her concerns about the distance growing between them, he'd brush her off. He'd say he was tired. That work was overwhelming. That she was being dramatic for wanting his attention. Dramatic. That word cut deeper than he could have known. Here she was, desperately trying to save their relationship, and he was dismissing her feelings as an overreaction. The romantic gestures stopped. The surprise dates vanished. The little thoughtful things that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. All gone. Isabelle started feeling like she was living with a roommate instead of a boyfriend. Someone who shared her space but not her life. Someone who existed beside her but never truly with her. She felt invisible. Like she'd become part of the furniture in their own home. And the loneliness of being ignored by the person you love is a special kind of pain that's hard to describe to anyone who hasn't lived through it. That's when everything started to change. That's when Frank entered the picture in a way that would alter all of their lives forever. Frank was Warren's younger brother. He'd always been around for family gatherings, game nights, holiday dinners, but Isabelle had never really paid much attention to him before. He was just Warren's brother, part of the background of their lives together. But as Warren withdrew further into himself, Frank somehow became more present. He'd come over for those family dinners and actually engage in conversation. While Warren scrolled mindlessly through his phone, Frank would ask Isabelle about her latest events. He'd remember the names of her difficult clients. He'd ask follow-up questions about stories she'd mentioned weeks ago. At first, it was completely innocent. Just normal, polite conversation. But to Isabelle, who'd been starving for genuine human connection, even basic attention felt like sunlight after months of darkness. She started looking forward to Frank's visits. When he'd walk through the door, she'd feel this little spark of excitement, knowing that someone in that house would actually acknowledge her existence. When Warren would ignore her all evening, Frank would compliment her cooking. When Warren couldn't be bothered to ask about her day, Frank would want to know every detail about the bridezilla she'd been dealing with all week. Frank made her feel seen, like she mattered, like she was a real person worthy of attention and interest. And after so long feeling invisible, that recognition felt intoxicating. Isabelle knew how it looked. She knew she should have pulled back, created distance, protected the boundaries of her relationship with Warren. But honestly, she couldn't bring herself to give up the one source of validation she had left. The conversations between Isabelle and Frank grew longer, deeper, more meaningful. He'd stay after Warren went to bed and they'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. Her dreams of expanding her business, his plans to start his own company. How different they both felt from their younger selves. These weren't surface-level chats. Frank really listened when Isabelle opened up about her childhood, about her father's emotional unavailability, and how it had shaped her need to feel valued by her partner, about how important it was to her to be with someone who actually saw her worth. Warren had known all these things about Isabelle. She'd told him years ago. But somewhere along the way, he'd stopped caring. Or maybe he'd never truly understood how deeply those childhood wounds ran. Frank not only listened, he understood. He told her she deserved better than being taken for granted. And hearing someone say those words out loud felt like permission to want more, to expect more, to believe she was worthy of more. Meanwhile, Warren remained completely oblivious. He'd come home, barely acknowledge Isabelle's presence, consume whatever meal she'd prepared, and disappear into his work emails or mindless television. He had no idea that while he was checked out, his brother and his girlfriend were forming this intense emotional bond right under his nose. Isabelle felt more connected to Frank in a few months than she'd felt to Warren in years, and she knew that probably sounded terrible. She knew what people would think. But they didn't understand what it was like to feel so completely abandoned by someone who was supposed to love you. The texting started casually enough. Funny memes shared during lunch breaks, complaints about difficult clients, random observations about life. But it escalated quickly into daily conversations that covered every aspect of their lives. Frank would send good morning messages while Warren rushed out the door without a word. He'd check in during the afternoon while Warren ignored her calls. He'd remember when Isabelle had important presentations and would ask how they went. Warren couldn't even remember what she did for a living half the time. The emotional connection she was building with Frank felt more authentic than anything she'd experienced with Warren in ages. And Isabelle started to wonder if maybe she'd been settling for less than she deserved all along. People might judge her for this. She knew they would. But she didn't think they could truly understand what it's like to feel invisible in your own relationship. To have the person you love treat you like you're nothing more than a piece of furniture cluttering their space. Frank saw her, really saw her, and valued what he saw. He made her feel beautiful, interesting, and worth listening to. Warren made her feel like a burden, like her feelings and needs were too demanding, too exhausting, too much trouble to deal with. When someone makes you feel that small for that long, and then someone else comes along who makes you feel important again, it's almost impossible not to be drawn to that light in the darkness. The texting became constant. Frank would call her during his breaks just to hear her voice, and Isabelle found herself anticipating those calls more than coming home to Warren. They'd talk for hours about everything, his dreams, her frustrations, how they both felt like they were settling for less than they deserved in life. Frank told her repeatedly that she was too special for someone who couldn't recognize her worth, and honestly, he was right. She started to believe it. Isabelle began finding excuses to see Frank more often. She'd invite him over when Warren was working late, which was most nights anyway. They'd order takeout and have real conversations instead of sitting in suffocating silence. Frank would help her plan events, offer feedback on her ideas, make her feel like her work actually mattered to someone. When Isabelle told Warren about difficult clients or stressful deadlines, he'd grunt or change the subject. When she told Frank the same stories, he'd ask detailed follow-up questions and genuinely care about her answers. The emotional intimacy was intoxicating. Frank remembered every tiny detail about her life. Warren couldn't even remember when she had important meetings. Frank would bring her coffee from that specific cafe she'd mentioned liking once 3 months earlier. Warren couldn't remember how she took her coffee after 7 years together. Frank made her feel valued in ways Warren had completely stopped doing, maybe had never truly done. Isabelle started sharing things with Frank that she'd given up trying to share with Warren, her fears about the future, her dreams for her business, her frustration with feeling trapped. Frank understood her in ways Warren never had, even during their best times. When she told Frank about her childhood and how her father's emotional absence had affected her, he actually got it. He told her she deserved someone who made her feel secure and valued every single day. Warren knew all about her father issues, but had never connected how his own emotional distance was triggering the exact same wounds. Frank not only understood, he actively worked to make her feel the opposite: important, cherished, heard. Isabelle knew what this looked like from the outside. She wasn't naive. But people didn't understand the full context. Warren had been emotionally neglecting her for over a year. She'd tried everything to fix their relationship. She'd suggested counseling. She'd planned special dates. She'd initiated difficult conversations. Everything she could think of to reconnect with the man she loved. Warren would either dismiss her concerns entirely or promise to try harder, then change absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, Frank was giving her everything Warren used to give her and more: the meaningful conversations, the genuine attention, the feeling of being truly cared for. Frank was providing emotional support while Warren couldn't even be bothered to ask about her day. The physical attraction was inevitable. When someone makes you feel that valued and connected, when they actually see you as a person worth investing in, it's natural to feel drawn to them. Frank would compliment her in ways Warren had stopped doing years ago. He'd notice when she wore something new or changed her hairstyle. Warren wouldn't notice if she dyed her hair bright purple. Frank made her feel beautiful and desirable again, something she'd forgotten she could feel after months of Warren treating her like she was invisible. They started having longer conversations when Warren was asleep or working late. Frank would stay after family dinners and they'd talk on the porch for hours. They'd sit closer together, find excuses to touch hands when passing things, let their eyes meet in ways that carried unspoken meaning. The chemistry was undeniable. And honestly, it felt more real than anything she'd experienced with Warren in forever. Frank saw her as this vibrant, fascinating woman. Warren saw her as just another obligation to manage around his work schedule. Isabelle started looking forward to seeing Frank more than she looked forward to seeing her own boyfriend. When Warren would text that he'd be late from work again, she'd feel relief instead of disappointment because it meant maybe Frank would stop by. When Warren would fall asleep on the couch during their planned date nights, she'd text Frank and have better conversations than she and Warren had managed in months. Frank was becoming her emotional support system. Warren was becoming a stranger she happened to live with. The guilt existed, but it was overshadowed by finally feeling alive again. Finally feeling like someone genuinely enjoyed her company and valued her thoughts and feelings. Warren had been taking her for granted for so long that she'd started to believe maybe she wasn't worth the effort. Frank reminded her that she was worth being pursued, worth deep conversations, worth someone's full attention. He was giving her everything she'd been begging Warren for, and Warren didn't even notice because he was too wrapped up in his own world to see what was happening right in front of him. The day everything shattered was a Tuesday. Warren was supposed to be in back-to-back meetings all day, some huge presentation he'd been stressing about for weeks. He barely spoke 2 words to Isabelle that morning, just grabbed his coffee and rushed out like always. Isabelle had taken the day off to prepare for their anniversary party that weekend. But honestly, she was feeling so disconnected from Warren that the whole celebration felt fake. 7 years together and they felt like strangers. She was questioning everything about their relationship, wondering if this was really what she wanted for the rest of her life. Frank texted her around noon, asking if she needed help moving furniture for the party setup. Warren had mentioned needing to rearrange the living room, but of course hadn't actually helped with any of the planning. Frank offering to help felt so natural, so caring. Exactly what she needed. She said yes without hesitation. When he showed up, he brought lunch from her favorite restaurant and actually seemed excited about helping her create something beautiful for the party. Warren couldn't even be bothered to give input on decorations, but Frank was genuinely interested in her vision. They started moving the couch and chairs around, and Frank was being so sweet about everything. He kept asking what she thought would look best, complimenting her eye for design, making her feel like her opinions actually mattered. They were laughing and talking, and it felt so wonderful to have someone there who actually wanted to be there, who wasn't treating spending time with her like a chore. When Warren and Isabelle did projects together, he always acted like it was such a burden, like she was asking too much of his precious time. The physical work meant they were close together, touching hands when they both reached for the same thing. brushing against each other in narrow spaces. Frank smelled amazing. This cologne she'd never noticed before. And every time he'd lean close to move something heavy, she'd catch herself breathing it in. When they finally got everything arranged perfectly, they collapsed on the couch together, both a little sweaty and laughing about how much work it had been. Frank looked at her and said she was amazing for pulling all this together, that Warren was lucky to have someone who cared so much about making things special. That's when everything shifted. Frank reached over and tucked a piece of hair behind her ear that had come loose while they were working. And the way he looked at her was so intense, like he really saw her, all of her, and liked what he saw. No one had looked at her like that in years. Warren looked through her most of the time, or looked at her with irritation when she wanted to talk about something important. Frank was looking at her like she was the most fascinating person in the world, and she felt beautiful for the first time in forever. She should have pulled away. She should have said something to break the moment, but honestly, she didn't want to. She wanted to feel desired and valued and seen, and Frank was offering all of that. When he leaned in to kiss her, she didn't stop him. She kissed him back because it felt like coming alive after being dead for months. It felt like finally being appreciated by someone who understood her worth. Warren had made her feel invisible for so long that Frank's attention felt like oxygen after drowning. The kiss turned into more. Frank was so gentle and attentive, asking if she was okay, telling her how beautiful she was, how long he'd been thinking about this. It felt incredible to have someone be so present with her, so focused on her and her feelings. She and Warren hadn't been truly intimate in months because he was always too tired or too stressed or too distracted. Frank was completely there with her, making her feel cherished in ways she'd forgotten were possible. They ended up in her bedroom, and Isabelle knew how terrible that sounded. But in that moment, it felt right. It felt like she was finally getting the connection and intimacy she'd been craving for so long. Frank was everything Warren wasn't. Present, attentive, passionate, grateful to be with her. He made her feel sexy and wanted and valuable. All the things Warren had stopped making her feel. She felt guilty about the location, but not about finally feeling alive again. Isabelle was so caught up in finally feeling desired and appreciated that she didn't hear Warren's car in the driveway. She didn't hear the front door open. She didn't hear his footsteps on the stairs. Frank and Isabelle were completely lost in each other. In this amazing connection they'd been building for months. She was feeling things she hadn't felt in years. Passion, excitement, the thrill of being truly wanted by someone. The last thing on her mind was Warren coming home early from his precious meetings. When Warren appeared in the doorway, everything stopped. Not just the physical intimacy, but time itself seemed to freeze. Frank and Isabelle were tangled together in her bed, the same bed Warren and she had shared for years. And Warren was just standing there with an expression she'd never seen before. Not angry, not hurt, just completely cold, empty. He had his phone out, and she heard the camera sound, and she realized with horror that he was taking pictures. Not just one or two, but multiple photos from different angles, like he was documenting evidence for a crime scene. Isabelle tried to say something to explain, but Warren just held up his hand to stop her. He didn't yell or scream or throw anything like she expected. He just took his pictures, looked at both of them with this disgusted expression, and walked out. She heard his car start up and drive away. Frank and Isabelle just sat there in shock. The whole thing lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like hours. Isabelle kept expecting Warren to come back and confront them, to give her a chance to explain how they'd gotten to this point, but he just left. Frank panicked immediately. He started getting dressed frantically, talking about how Warren was going to kill him, how this was going to destroy their family, how they needed to figure out what to say. But Isabelle was more confused than panicked. Warren had seemed so detached from their relationship that part of her wondered if he'd even care that much. Maybe this would be the wake-up call he needed to realize what he'd been taking for granted. Maybe seeing that someone else valued her would make him remember why he fell for her in the first place. The next 2 days were the strangest of Isabelle's life. Warren came home that night and acted completely normal. He said hello, asked about her day, ate the dinner she made, watched television with her like nothing had happened. Isabelle kept waiting for him to bring up what he'd seen, to ask questions, to explode, anything. but he just went about his routine like it was any other day. Frank was texting her constantly, freaking out about what Warren might be planning. But Warren seemed fine. Better than fine, actually. He was more present and talkative than he'd been in months. Isabelle started wondering if maybe Warren hadn't actually seen what she thought he'd seen. Maybe he just glanced in and left without really processing what was happening. Maybe those camera sounds she heard were just notifications from his phone. If he'd really caught his girlfriend and his brother together, wouldn't he be acting differently? Wouldn't he be angry or hurt or demanding explanations? Instead, he was being nicer to her than he'd been all year. Warren even helped her finish setting up for the anniversary party, which was completely out of character for him lately. He moved furniture without complaining, hung decorations where she asked, even complimented how everything looked. He seemed genuinely excited about the party, talking about how nice it would be to celebrate with their families. Isabelle started feeling hopeful that maybe this whole thing with Frank had somehow reset their relationship, reminded Warren of what he had with her. Frank was a wreck, though. He kept asking if Warren had said anything, if she thought they should tell him themselves, if maybe he should talk to Warren man to man, but Isabelle told him to calm down. Warren was acting normal, which meant either he didn't see what they thought he saw, or he was choosing to overlook it and focus on rebuilding their relationship. Either way, bringing it up would just create unnecessary drama. Frank disagreed, but she convinced him to follow her lead and act normal too. The morning of their anniversary party, Warren was in such a good mood. He brought Isabelle coffee in bed, something he hadn't done in forever. He told her he had a special surprise planned for the party. He said he'd been working on something for weeks that would show everyone how much she meant to him. Isabelle felt this rush of hope that maybe they'd finally turned a corner, that Warren had realized how close he'd come to losing her and was ready to be the partner she'd been needing all along. She spent the whole day getting ready, doing her hair and makeup perfectly, wearing this dress she knew Warren loved. Frank came early to help set up, and he seemed calmer than he'd been the past few days. Warren was being so sweet to both of them, joking around with Frank like brothers do, complimenting Isabelle every few minutes. The three of them working together to get everything ready felt almost normal, like maybe they could all move past this and be okay. Guests started arriving around 6 o'clock, and it was perfect. Both their families, all their closest friends, everyone who'd been part of their 7-year journey together. People kept telling them how cute they were together, how they couldn't wait to see what the next 7 years would bring. Warren's mother made a speech about how proud she was of the man Warren had become and how lucky they felt to have Isabelle as part of their family. Frank's parents talked about how wonderful it was to see Warren so happy and settled. Warren seemed to be soaking up all the attention and praise. He kept his arm around Isabelle all night, introducing her to people as the love of his life, telling stories about their early days together. Isabelle felt like she was seeing glimpses of the old Warren, the one who used to make her feel special and cherished. Maybe catching her with Frank had been exactly the shock he needed to remember how much she meant to him. Maybe this party would mark a new beginning for them. After dinner, Warren stood up and asked for everyone's attention. He had this huge smile on his face as he talked about how the past 7 years had been the best of his life, how much he'd learned about love and commitment and partnership. He talked about all the memories they'd made together, all the ways Isabelle had supported his dreams and pushed him to be better. He said he had a special presentation to show everyone what their relationship meant to him. Isabelle felt her heart racing with excitement. Warren pulled out his laptop and started showing pictures of them through the years. Photos from their first date, their first vacation, holidays with family, all these beautiful moments from their life together. Everyone was smiling and laughing at the memories, and Isabelle felt so proud of what they'd built together. This was exactly what she'd been missing. Warren acknowledging their relationship publicly, showing everyone how much she meant to him. The presentation was beautiful and romantic and everything she'd been craving from him. Then the pictures changed. Suddenly, there she was on the screen, in their bedroom, with Frank. Multiple photos from different angles showing everything in explicit, horrible detail. The room went completely silent. Isabelle watched their family's faces change from happiness to shock to disgust in real time. Warren's mother gasped and covered her mouth. Her own parents looked like they'd been physically slapped. Frank went white as a sheet and started shaking next to her. Warren stood up calmly and said, Congratulations are in order for the two pieces of trash who found each other. He looked directly at Frank and Isabelle, held up his middle finger, and walked out of the party just like that. Left her standing there in front of everyone who mattered to them with those horrible pictures still frozen on the screen behind her. The silence felt like it lasted forever. Nobody knew what to say or do. Frank's father was staring at his son like he didn't recognize him. Warren's mother was crying. Isabelle's mother looked absolutely mortified. Isabelle tried to say something, anything to explain what they'd just seen. But what could she possibly say? Those pictures told the whole story. And it wasn't a story that made her look good. People started leaving immediately. No one said goodbye. No one made eye contact with her. They just grabbed their coats and purses and got out of there as fast as possible. Frank tried to say something to his parents, but his father told him not to even speak. Isabelle's parents stayed until everyone else left. And then her father just looked at her and said he was disappointed. Not angry, just disappointed. Which somehow felt worse. She spent that night alone in the house, crying harder than she had since she was a kid. Not just because of the humiliation, though that was horrible enough, but because she realized Warren had been planning this the whole time. He'd known exactly what he saw that day. And instead of giving her a chance to explain or work things out, he'd planned this elaborate revenge. He'd let her believe everything was fine while he plotted to destroy her in front of everyone they knew. The worst part was realizing that Warren had been distant and cold for months. But apparently, he was capable of planning something this calculated and cruel. If he could put this much thought and energy into humiliating her, why couldn't he have put that same effort into saving their relationship? Why couldn't he have fought for them instead of just checking out emotionally and leaving her to figure things out on her own? Frank stopped returning her calls after that night. His family completely cut him off, and Isabelle's family made it clear they were ashamed of her. Warren moved out while she was at work the next day and took everything that was his. He left divorce papers on the kitchen counter with a note saying he'd never forgive her for betraying him with his own brother. He made it sound like she'd planned this whole thing to hurt him specifically. Like she'd targeted Frank just to be cruel. What Warren didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that she hadn't set out to hurt anyone. She'd just been so lonely and neglected in their relationship that when someone finally showed her attention and care, she responded to it. Frank made her feel valued and heard in ways Warren had stopped doing. Yes, Frank being Warren's brother made it worse. But it wasn't like she chose Frank to hurt Warren. She chose Frank because he was there for her when Warren wasn't. The divorce was finalized within 3 months. Warren had those pictures as evidence, so there wasn't much she could fight. He got the house. Most of their mutual friends took his side, and Isabelle lost several clients when word got around about what had happened. Apparently, people don't want their wedding coordinator to be someone who cheated on her partner at their anniversary party. Warren made sure everyone knew exactly what she'd done and why he'd left her. Isabelle ended up having to move back in with her parents at 28 years old, starting her life completely over. Her event planning business basically collapsed because Warren had made sure everyone in their social circle knew what kind of person she was. He painted her as this manipulative woman who seduced his innocent brother and destroyed their family. Frank moved to another state and changed his phone number, so she couldn't even talk to the one person who understood her side of things. Meanwhile, Warren was thriving. He got promoted at work, started going out with friends again, seemed happier than he'd been in years. People kept telling Isabelle how much better he looked, how he was like a new person now that he'd gotten rid of her. Like she'd been this burden dragging him down, when really she'd been the one trying to save their relationship while he checked out completely. The thing that really gets to Isabelle is that everyone acts like Warren is this innocent victim, and she's this evil woman who destroyed a perfect relationship. But they don't know what it was like living with someone who treated her like she was invisible. They don't know how many times she tried to talk to Warren about their problems, how many times she suggested counseling or date nights or anything to reconnect. They just see the cheating and decide she's the villain. She's not saying what she did was right. But Warren shares some responsibility for how they got there. He emotionally abandoned her long before she ever developed feelings for Frank. He made her feel unwanted and unimportant and taken for granted. When Frank came along and made her feel the opposite of all those things, of course she was going to be drawn to that. Warren created the conditions that led to this happening, even if he didn't deserve what she did. Now she's 28, single, living with her parents, and starting over completely. Warren has moved on, and everyone thinks he's better off without her. Frank won't talk to her. Their families hate her, and she's lost almost everything that mattered to her. All because Warren couldn't be bothered to notice that his girlfriend was dying inside their relationship. And when someone else did notice, he chose revenge over trying to understand why it happened. She knows she'll never forgive him for humiliating her like that instead of being a man and dealing with their problems privately. The public destruction felt unnecessarily cruel. Like he wanted to make sure she suffered as much as possible. And maybe she did deserve to suffer for what she did. But did she deserve to have her entire life destroyed in front of 50 people? Did she deserve to lose everything? Her home, her business, her reputation, her family's respect, all in one devastating moment? These are the questions Isabelle still asks herself every day. Questions without clear answers. Questions that keep her up at night in her childhood bedroom, wondering how her life fell apart so completely. So there you have it. A 7-year relationship destroyed by emotional neglect, forbidden connection, and devastating revenge. A woman who lost everything because she sought comfort in the wrong place. A man who chose public humiliation over private resolution. Was Isabelle wrong to betray Warren with his own brother? Absolutely. There's no justification for that betrayal, regardless of how lonely she felt. But was Warren innocent in the destruction of their relationship? That's a more complicated question. Sometimes the truth isn't black and white. Sometimes everyone shares responsibility for how things fall apart, even if the final act of betrayal belongs to one person alone. What do you think? Could you ever forgive a betrayal like this? And if you were Warren, would you have chosen revenge or resolution? I'm Emma, and this has been another story from Mrs. Emma. If this story moved you, shocked you, or made you think differently about betrayal and relationships, please hit that like button. Share this video with your friends who love complicated, real-life stories. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss another confession, another truth, another glimpse into the messy reality of human relationships. Until next time, remember that everyone has a story. And sometimes the most important thing we can do is listen to all sides before we decide who the villain really is. Take care of yourselves, and take care of each other.